Hello everyone. This is a short video to explain to you the basics of the European Union's external relations. So the European Union as a global actor. I would like to show a few of the key fundamentals of how the European Union deals with its own, not just its own member states, but also with third states, other states in the world. So let me share a short PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared for you. And we can go through that presentation together. So it's indeed about the legal competences of the European Union. So I'm focusing on what the treaty tells us and what the Court of Justice has explained to us what the European Union can do in its relations with other states. So the European Union as a global actor has become a term, it has become a phenomenon that is being discussed very widely these days. The European Union, of course, used to be an international organization dealing with its own member states, basically with its own member states. But if you now look at the treaty, you find many references to where the European Union deals with other states. It is, of course, not just about the internal market anymore in the European Union, but it's also about the external effects of the European Union's internal markets. So it's dealings with other states and also other international organizations. The European Union is a very special organization, and just to refresh your memory, there's three elements that make it so special. First of it is a transfer of competences. So the member states of the European Union have transferred some of their competences to the European Union. That is quite special in international law, that states actually give away some of their competences to an international organization. The second one is the primacy of European Union law. So if you have a conflict between a European Union law rule and a domestic, a national rule, you should always give preference to the European Union rule. And that is, again, of course, something special. And the third specific characteristic of the European Union would be direct effects. And direct effects allows EU citizens to actually invoke rules of European Union law directly before their national courts. And again, that is a special characteristic. But it's not just about the EU and its own member states. The European Union has an international legal status. As we say, it has legal personality, international legal personality. So it exists in the international legal system, and it engages not just with its own member states, but also with many other states around the world. Why is it doing that? That is because if you look at the treaty, there are also external objectives. The European Union does not just want to deal with its own member states. No, it wants to play a world role. If you look at Article 3, Paragraph 5 of the TEU, for instance, you can see that in its relations with the wider world, the Union shall uphold and promote its values and interests. And it shall contribute to the protection of its citizens, but also to peace and security, the environment and human rights. So all these things show you that the European Union is not just focused on its own member states, but it wants to play a role in the world, and it's part of its objectives. You will find similar objectives in Article 21 of the TEU. There's basically a few principles that you need to take into account if you want to study the European Union's external relations. The very first one is the principle of conferral. It tells us that the Union can only act if it is allowed to act. So the Union can never go beyond its competences. You always will need to find a legal basis in the treaty for the European Union to act. The second principle is sincere cooperation. It tells the Union and its member states to work together. And it particularly tells member states not to go their own way. Member states are not allowed to simply sideline or bypass the European Union in their external relations. In their dealings with third states, they have to act EU law and cannot simply bypass the European Union. You can find that in Article 4, Paragraph 3, but variants of that principle can also be found in other articles. Article 13, which deals with the sincere cooperation between the institutions, the Commission, the European Council, the Council of the European Union, European Parliament, and also in Article 24, which deals with loyalty and loyal cooperation in the area of foreign and security policy. So if you want to have a relationship with another state, the best thing, of course, is to conclude an international agreement. Then you establish a legal relationship with another state. European Union can do that. On the basis of Article 16, it is allowed to conclude international agreements with other states and with other international organizations. And you see a list of reasons here. The treaties may provide for that competence. It may be a decision, or it may be necessary for the Union to conclude an international agreement. The bottom line is that Article 216 provides the European Union with a sort of general competence to conclude international agreements. So that is the European Union itself, right? It's not the member states. The Union can do that. And the whole procedure to actually engage in international agreements and to negotiate and conclude international agreements can be found in Article 218 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. That should be TFEU and not TEU, Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So there's always three questions that you need to raise in order to understand whether the European Union does have a competence to conclude international agreements. The very first question is always about the existence. Does a competence exist? Does the European Union actually have a competence to conclude an international agreement? If so, then you come to the next question, that is the nature of the competence. So if there is a competence, what is the nature of this competence? Is it an exclusive competence, allowing the European Union to deal just by itself without the member states? Or is it a shared competence, which would involve the member states, because then the competence is shared between the European Union and the member states? And after these two questions, you also have the question about the scope. So if the European Union is exclusively competent, let's say, in the area of trade, common commercial policy, how far can we stretch common commercial policy? What is covered by trade? What is not covered by trade? That is the question about the scope of the competence. So having these different competences, exclusive and shared, also results or may result in different types of agreements. So an exclusive EU competence usually means that the European Union can conclude this international agreement just by itself. It does not need the member states. It results in what we call an EU-only agreement. If the member states are exclusively competent, then the Union cannot do anything. So then it's just for the member states to conclude international agreements. But in many cases, they share a competence. And a shared competence would normally result in what we call a mixed agreement. It's not necessary. There can be reasons not to go for a mixed agreement, but in many cases, it will result in a mixed agreement, which is signed by not just the European Union, but also by all the member states. So to give you some examples, an EU-only agreement would be, for instance, a free trade agreement. So an FTA that was concluded between the European Union and Singapore, for instance. Just two signatures, European Union and Singapore. A mixed agreement, we still call it a bilateral one if it's the European Union and the member states on one hand, and for instance, Canada on the other hand. CETA is a good example of an international agreement between the European Union and the member states on the one hand, and Canada on the other hand. How many signatures? Well, 27 for the member states, one for the European Union on the one hand, and one for Canada on the other hand. And then there's multilateral ones, multilateral mixed agreements. For instance, Kyoto Protocol on basically the environmental rules, where not just the European Union and its member states, but almost everyone in the world is a party to. That is a different situation, but here again, you see that the EU and its members work together. They work as a bloc. How does this play out in Brexit? I mean, this is one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves over the past years. Can the United Kingdom still remain a party to agreements that were concluded by the European Union? By the European Union only? My answer would be probably not. Because since it's no longer a member of the European Union, it's no longer bound by agreements that were concluded by the European Union. But what about mixed agreements? Can the United Kingdom still remain a party to mixed agreements that were also signed by the United Kingdom? My answer would probably still be no, because the only reason that the United Kingdom joined the mixed agreements was because it was a member of the European Union. But obviously, these days, the United Kingdom will have to find its own way, and they will have to renegotiate, for instance, the agreement that we have with Canada, but also also it will have to find its own ways in relations with Mercosur, for instance. So all kinds of things change because they are no longer a member of the European Union. So that brings us to the conclusion of this short video. And one of the conclusions is that the European Union is increasingly competent. It has lots of competences to act on its own in international relations. In some cases, they still need the member states, though. And then we're talking about shared competences. And shared competences, in many cases, lead to mixed agreements. There are some downsides of mixed agreements, some problems. For instance, it takes a long time to conclude a mixed agreement because you do not just need the signature and the ratification by the European Union, but also by the 27 member states. So it may take years for a mixed agreement to actually enter into force after a while. The second problem is that it remains very unclear who is competent for what. Where does the line of competence division lie? Is it the European Union that is competent for certain aspects? Well, for trade we know, yes, but for other issues, policy areas, it's less clear. So for third states, it's increasingly problematic to see who is responsible for a mixed agreement. Is it the European Union or is it the member states? The treaties do not tell us. So for third states, for non-EU member states, it has become problematic to deal with the European Union in that respect. My proposal has always been that it should be possible for third states to actually address the European Union for everything. And it will be up to the European Union to sort of say who is competent. And we should not lay the burden of proof in the hands of the non-EU trade partners. So if you want to know more about EU external relations, let me just squeeze in this short commercial break. But the new edition of our book is just out. And it deals with EU, the basics, the fundamentals of EU external relations law. So to conclude, this is basically what I wanted to say, and I hope you enjoyed this short video. And please feel free to look up the publications that we made, also in the context of the book, and hope to see you someday. Bye bye.